You come up to this mayoral election with lots of ideas. Which ideas do you think are going to be picked up or have the greatest possibility of being picked up by whoever wins on Thursday?
I think because transport is very much under discussion, we've had short-term bailouts for TfL, slightly longer term for the train operating companies. But I think because fares are going to be under discussion, how we raise money for transport, these twin ideas of having smarter, fairer, per-mile road charging and reducing the fares, bringing down the fare zones to one single zone, which I've been talking about since the last election, those two ideas are going to be really big in the next term, and they'll come through whether or not I'm there.
And the idea is that you don't then discriminate between somebody who lives further out of London in Zone 6 and they're paying more for their transport into London compared to...
Our concept of what a key worker is really transformed in this pandemic, and I think a lot of the people who work in central London, people who work in hospitals, people who clean in the offices, the people who run the sandwich bars, all of those people are our key workers as well, and they cannot afford to live in central London on their wages. So it's really unfair that they are charged both with their time and their money for travelling further from outer London. This concept is something that's fundamental about equality, and I think people are really up for changing that.
But do you think there's going to, ultimately, there'll have to be a slight uplift in the Zone 1 to 2 charges in order to cover the cost of reducing Zone 5 and 6 charges into central London?
During the last election, I worked this out in some detail because we had a stable basis on which to work. And what I was planning to do was bring down every fare outside of Zones 1 and 2, and Zone 1 and 2 fares would go up with inflation. People living in Zone 1 and 2 would see improvements in walking and cycling, so they'd have alternatives to getting on public transport, which people travelling longer distances don't necessarily have. So this was a very, very fair way of doing things. And this worked out in terms of funding as well.
On the road charging, what would you cap that at a particular rate to use London's roads? Where would it be compared to the £15 a day?
This is the work that needs to be done, basically. I mean, people at the moment, they pay one flat charge for the whole day, no matter how much they drive. And I think we need to make sure that people's actual impact on the air pollution, on congestion, is charged for. And it would have to be a fair rate, but it would be smart. It would vary. It would cost a lot more to drive in central London during the rush hour than it would cost to drive during the night in outer London. This is the whole point of the scheme. It's smart, it's fair, and you can do an awful lot to achieve all your policy goals by varying those levers and making sure that people are paying the right amount.
And how much, and you would also scrap City Airport?
I would love to do that, yes. And so obviously...
But that's jobs. I mean, you're smiling, but those are people's livelihoods and jobs.
There is an opportunity cost in jobs of having an airport there. There are only ones of thousands of jobs in the airport itself, and it blights the whole area. You cannot have housing in the area where there might be a crash. You have noise that makes it really hard to live around there. Businesses are limited in what they can do. So if we were to take that 500,000 square metres of space and create new jobs, the estimate, the basic estimate is there's at least 16,000 jobs. That's more already. There's an opportunity cost to the economy of having that airport there. And once we've got Crossrail open, there's really no excuse. People can get to Heathrow much more easily.
Where do you see cycle lanes in the next 3 years? Do you think we're going to see a further expansion of cycle lanes?
We need, and what we've had so far in London is a failure to put together that coherent, linked up quality cycle network. I've pledged to complete that as mayor, and at the moment there are some obvious gaps.
You've also, on the subject of crime, Sian, said that if you were mayor you would end stop and search for cannabis. Do you think it's inevitable now, or looking ahead, not necessarily now, but looking ahead, do you think it's inevitable that the Met Police that this will become a policy? Is this something you'd like to see become a policy regardless of whether you're mayor or not?
I think so. I mean, it was a recommendation from a report looking at stop and search, a number of cases where there'd been complaints in detail, and the recommendation from that was that the smell of cannabis alone shouldn't ever be used as grounds for stop and search, because it was leading to...
It's fairly clear evidence is being...
discrimination. It was leading to people who've done nothing wrong being suspected and searched and treated badly and leading to complaints. So it's a matter of building up trust. This is one of the most important things we can do, is enact that recommendation.
But isn't it? It's a short hop to legalising cannabis.
I think long term, the Greens have spent a long time working with campaigners, bereaved families, medical professionals, getting together the most progressive, the most transformative drugs policy at a national level that any party has. And I think ultimately we are going to see a real change to a genuine harm reduction approach, one that treats drug use as a medical problem when it is a problem, and doesn't treat it as a criminal thing that basically just leaves the market for something that's going to happen in the hands of organised crime.
You think within 10 years you could eradicate violent crime in London?
Absolutely. I mean, to me,
you think that's possible?
It's part of directing police resources to where they can be most effective. And at the moment, I don't think they're being effective, doing lots of blanket stop and search.
You want a fairer deal for renters in this city. What does that look like?
Well, renters, I'm a private renter myself. I know that renters' rights have been eroded and eroded. We are absolutely at the mercy of a market that is not properly regulated. And where there are regulations, there isn't the enforcement we need. Our rights need to be improved. And the big gap at the moment is, well, the biggest gap is the fact that the government promised nearly 2 years ago to get rid of no-fault evictions, the fact that your landlord can evict you without any reason. That makes a mockery of the right that you, in theory, have to enforce good state of repair on your homes. But the one that's really missing is about cost. Wages have gone up nowhere near as much as rents. Rents are getting more and more unaffordable.
But as Mayor of London,
people.
You wouldn't be able to introduce rent controls.
This is a power we have to fight for. I think we need to be going to the government with a bill in front of Parliament. We have the right to put a bill before Parliament, to say to government and to say to MPs, we need this power in London, to work with mayors of other cities who would be a cross-party coalition.
But it's a London problem, isn't it?
It's a problem in many other cities.